I had a little question about an issue with posting quizzes that have been created with Google Forms as self-marking quizzes and how we get them to automatically sync up all the marks in your classroom. So I thought it'd be kind of as easy as explaining it verbally to just make a wee video, and hopefully that clarifies the process. So I'll start from the kind of basics because I don't know what your level of understanding would currently be. I'm not going to talk about creating the quiz. Obviously, if you've got any questions about that, you can give me a shout at another point. So if you have a quiz that you wanted to set, go to assignment, so quiz, and then from your drive, find whatever quiz it is that you wanted to use. Um, so I think I've got one called example quiz. See if I can find that. There we go. I'll do it. So when you've added your quiz to your assignment, you'll notice there's a little checkbox at the bottom here that says grade importing that should be switched on. However, there is a potential issue. If you have added other resources, like for example, a slideshow or something else, what will happen is that will automatically switch off because for reasons I'm not totally sure about, it will only allow you to use grade importing with a single item attached or a single form attached. So even if you attach a form, like a single form and a slideshow with some information, it won't allow you to automatically use grade importing. So do keep that in mind. If you have a material that goes alongside this, it might be a good idea just to create a separate materials post, which would just say slideshow for such and such quiz, and then create this quiz as a separate item just by itself. So there's a couple of other things that are worth bearing in mind. Over at the side here, you'll see the points value. If you have attributed point values to all of the questions in your quiz, it's really important you make sure you change that point value to match what's set in the quiz, because when it does a total, for example, 10 out of 20, if you haven't set that correct, if there's only 20 marks in your quiz, but you leave that at 100, it will say, for example, 10 out of 100. And as usual, you can set your due date, topic, and so on. You can use locked mode in a Chromebook, which basically means if a pupil is doing it on a Chromebook, they will not be able to open up any other browser tabs. I don't know that it's necessarily that purposeful if they're working at home, though, because they could just use their phone to look things up anyway. Um, so just a couple of wee things about the quiz itself. I just wanted to show you a few things that you really ought to be careful of when you're setting the quiz itself. And when you go to the settings, it should obviously be turned to make this a quiz. And if you've done that, you would probably already have added your points values and so on. But there's something to be aware of. This release grade option immediately after submission or later after manual review is important to consider. If your quiz is entirely self-marking, i.e. it's all multiple choice, so everything can be easily marked correctly by the quiz itself, then immediately after each submission is absolutely fine unless you want to make sure that the pupils all get their answers at a given date. So for example, they couldn't share all the correct answers that they got with pupils who hadn't done it yet. So if you switch on immediately after submission, that will give the pupils the grades straight away. The potential problem is if you have an open response question or a short response where it's a text response and say a pupil misspells it so that their response doesn't match the response that you've typed in as the correct answer, it will be marked as wrong. And likewise, extended responses, the quiz can't obviously mark them. And so if you have immediately after each submission switched on, the pupil will receive a mark that assumes all of those extended responses are incorrect. So they may get an erroneous mark. So unless you're absolutely confident the quiz can mark everything automatically, I would say you're better to keep this as later after manual review, and that will allow you to go back through and look over the question responses that the candidates have entered. Otherwise, there's really not an awful lot to be concerned about in here. The one thing I would say that you certainly want to make sure you've got switched on, though, is limit to one response. And I would tick collect email addresses. Um, don't worry too much about response receipts and restrict to users in Stirling Council Education. And that will ensure that the pupil, when they complete the quiz, has to be signed in with their Google account. And if they are signed in with that, it will be able to link their response to the quiz with them in Classroom. If you don't have that switched on, or it's not collecting email addresses, it essentially records all the responses as anonymous, and it won't be able to match up the responses in the quiz to the pupil in your classroom. So just keep that in mind. You can also check these options here if you so wish. So now that we're quite happy that that's all set up, save that. I'll go back to where I was setting it. And actually, I've forgot to check. Total points here are 6, so I'll just change my total points there to 6 and assign that quiz. And that should be everything. If I switch over to looking at that from a pupil's view, see how this looks. So I open the quiz up, and there we go. That's it. I can't remember, it's so long ago. Floor plan. Cool. Great. So I'll just in some Simpsons answers there and submit it. And now we go back to the teacher's view, and what we'll see when we look at that quiz, I think there's this one. We've got one that's been turned in by that test pupil account. And if I go into that quiz, this is something you'd only need to do if it was a quiz where it had questions that you needed to answer or that you needed to mark manually. If we go into there and we go to the edit view and go to responses, we can respond or we can mark it by individual question, which is quite handy because it allows you to mark all the same question at the same time. Or we could look at that individual. So I'm just going to go down to this one here. Okay, and so set these marks. So it's already marked that one correctly. Let's mark this one correctly because the answer matched the answer that was put in there. So that was a 0. Okay, 0. So that's fine. And this shouldn't have a mark anyway. So that would be fine. If we've done that, we could save those marks. Now again, this step is unnecessary if your quiz is entirely self-marking. And so now that that quiz response has been marked, if I click the import grades button up here, what it will do is automatically take the grades from that quiz and put it into there. So we'll see that the pupil's got 4 points out of 6. That remains as a draft until you click on the pupil or pupils and return it to them. So although you can see the grades there, the pupils cannot. So just be aware that if you have set the quiz only to release grades, after you've manually done it, they'll not see anything there until you return it. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. As I said though, the going back into it and actually grading the marks, or sorry, correcting, using the wrong terms here, marking it correct or incorrect for each of the questions manually is only necessary if you've got those sorts of question types. And to restate, if you have all multiple choice or all fixed terms that the quiz can get correct, you don't need to carry out that step. You can just go straight to import grades and it will populate this all with the grades from your pupils. Hopefully that helps to clarify the process. Give me a wee shout if there's anything that's not clear though.